Sarah slid on her stocking feet over the threshold and slammed the door shut just as the lights went out. She had cut her arrival much closer than intended, but it couldn't have been helped. She had gone to get medicine for her sister, Ruth, who had contracted influenza. She had expected to be gone an hour, but when she rounded the final corner, there was a line of people stretching out the door of the druggist. In a city as congested and grimy as London was, the virus was spreading like wildfire. Sarah had waited, her anxiety building as the sun slipped ever closer to the horizon. The zeppelins were coming with enough regularity that they were still under blackout orders. As soon as night fell, every bright exterior light was to be extinguished to make it harder for the bombers to find their mark. Many bedraggled Londoners, including Sarah's own family, were so weary of the bombings and so frightened that they extinguished all the interior lights as well. Only fools would be out after dark, wandering through the city without a light. She fidgeted restlessly, imagining with terrifying clarity a bomb dropping right onto her head as she hurried home. She pictured her shopping bag flying into the air, flames licking at the edges before smashing back down in the rubble, the bottle within shattering. She saw Ruth dying in her bed, never knowing what had become of Sarah or the medicine, perhaps wondering why Sarah had abandoned her in her hour of most desperate need. But none of that happened. She had gotten what she came for and rushed through the thickening dark to her family's house just at the edge of the city. Sarah took a moment to catch her breath and let her heart rate slow. After she had collected herself, she gathered a few things: 2 thick slices of bread, a cup of warm broth, a glass of water, and placed them on a tray. She put the bottle of medicine in the pocket of her apron, her anxiety about breaking it still too raw to let her add it to the items on the tray. She felt her way through the house, pulling the curtains shut as she passed each window. Her walk up the stairs was usually confident, as she had made the trip in the dark every night since the blackouts had begun 3 years before. Tonight, though, her nerves were singing from her close call with the creeping dark, and she walked slowly, keeping both hands on the tray and sliding her elbow up the banister, both for balance and for orientation. At the top of the stairs, she turned left and walked down the short hall to the door at the end, Ruth's room. She placed the tray carefully on the floor, the cup and glass clinking musically together, and opened the door. She listened closely, trying to ascertain whether Ruth was sleeping. The room was eerily quiet, Ruth's usual strained, wet-sounding breathing absent for an agonizing moment. Then, just as she was about to panic, Sarah heard soft snoring. For the briefest of moments, Sarah was elated. That soft, unlabored snoring surely meant that Ruth's lungs were getting better. Very quickly, though, she realized that she was not hearing gentle snoring. The low-pitched droning was getting louder, and as it did, she could feel vibrations in the floor. "Ruth," her voice came out in a shaky whisper. The only sound was the insistent droning, growing ever louder, vibrating the house ever harder. Then, for a moment, the droning was drowned out by a high-pitched whistle. Then all at once, the world was on fire. The concussion from the explosion knocked Sarah into the door, but not off her feet. Sarah's indecisiveness evaporated. Her fear of the impending dark, and breaking the medicine bottle, and being blown up, and Ruth passing away thinking she had been abandoned, and the droning of an approaching zeppelin, and finally, the explosion that was surely just down the street based on the shock wave, had put her in a state of emotional saturation. She simply could not absorb anything else at that moment. She set the tray down, off to the side of the door where it wouldn't be tripped over, and stepped into the room. She took the 6 measured steps from the door to Ruth's bed. She was surprised when she sat on the edge of the bed to wake Ruth, to find that she was already sitting up. "Ruth," Sarah said, reaching out and grasping her by the shoulders. "We have to go down to the cellar." Ruth said nothing, and she did not move under Sarah's firm grip. She simply sat there, quiet and still. Suddenly, her head snapped around so viciously that her neck popped loudly. Sarah could see the whites of Ruth's eyes in the dim glow of the fires outside. They were open far wider than should have been possible. Her irises and pupils were simply gone, and her sclera looked faintly luminous. Sarah released Ruth's shoulders and stood up. Something was desperately wrong with her sister. Sarah knew that she had to get into the cellar. More explosions were rocking the house. She reached out again, but stopped short as Ruth's face split horrifically open in an open-mouthed scream. The scream smelled like the inside of a crypt, dusty and old, and with a faint hint of decay. Even after the shriek had quieted, Ruth's mouth hung open so wide that Sarah could clearly see her jaw was dislocated on both sides. Sarah walked backward slowly, keeping her eyes on the bed. As soon as she reached the door, she yanked it shut, pulling the key out of her apron pocket. Faster than she could ever have imagined a person, especially a very ill one, moving, the door started rattling in its frame as it was battered from the other side. She was so startled by the immediacy of the assault on the door that she dropped the key. She heard it clatter to the floor, but the loud banging from the door masked it enough that Sarah had no idea where it had landed. There were no windows in the hallway, and as she had pulled the drapes downstairs as she went through the rooms, it was completely dark. Sarah held tight to the doorknob, unsure if Ruth was coherent enough to know how to use it. Another explosion, this one much closer, made the house shudder, and dust rained from the ceiling. Sarah knew her only hope of surviving a direct hit to the house was to get to the cellar, but she worried that the moment she released her grip on the doorknob, the door would be ripped from the frame, and whatever her sister had become would be standing there, staring at her with white eyes, leering at her with an impossibly wide mouth. The thumping was insistent, but the doorknob never once rattled, and after several unbearable seconds, Sarah decided that if the house was hit, the terrifying specter of her sister would get out of the room anyway, and at least she could lock the cellar door from the inside. Taking a deep breath, she turned her body to face the darkness where the stairs were. With her left hand still on the knob, she released the right one and got set to run. Taking one final, shuddering breath, she let go of the handle and fled toward the stairs as fast as her feet could carry her. Even though terror was swimming through every vein, her mind was relatively focused. She found the banister right where she knew it would be. Her feet landed square in the center of each step as she pounded down the stairs. Though she had removed her boots at the door and had slipped on the way into the house, her feet remained under her as she ran over the polished wood floors. Her hand found the cellar door on the first try, and she pulled it shut just in time. As the lock clicked home, the hammering started. The cellar door was significantly heavier than the bedroom door had been, to keep the cold out of the main part of the house. The door rattled in the frame, but seemed in no danger of breaking or flying open. As Sarah walked down the steps, the beating on the door continuing, she pulled the chain for the single light bulb hanging in the middle of the windowless room. Staring up at her, from under a blanket on the other side of the room, was Ruth.